The Warcraft universe is one built upon conflict. It's in the name, and a common source of such conflict is the tense relationship between the two major political factions of Azeroth, the righteous alliance of humans, dwarves, elves, gnomes, and the like, and the honorable horde of orcs, trolls, tauren, goblins, and zombies? Yes, for all the traditional fantasy imagery the Warcraft series uses in its world, undead marching into battle alongside armies of orcs and trolls does seem to stick out. And from a lore perspective, going into World of Warcraft, these undead humans do make for some odd bedfellows with the rest of the Horde. So, how exactly did the Forsaken join the Horde? But before we get started, if you enjoy what you're seeing here, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more in the future. And if you really want to go above and beyond, ring the bell so you're notified every time I upload. Doing all of that really does help me out. YouTube seems more and more like an ancient, eternal old god that must be pleased with increasingly arcane rituals. And hey, if a like will sate its unrelenting hunger, that's not so bad. Alright, let's get going. After the undead incursion into the northern sections of the Eastern Kingdoms during the events of Warcraft 3, the Lich King's hold over much of his Scourge forces on the continent began to wane as his attention was focused elsewhere. This weakening grip allowed for some of his undead thralls to wrestle control of themselves free from the Lich King, restoring their memories and free will to the reanimated corpses. Though their actions while at the beck and call of the Lich King were no fault of their own, many of these former humans and elves were haunted by the horrors that they were forced to commit, and those that did not go mad or end their new existence came to a startling realization. Almost every other living creature on Azeroth wanted to destroy them. Family and friends who had survived the Scourge invasion saw the undead as twisted reflections of their former selves. Grotesque puppets wearing the decaying skin and faces of loved ones now dead. Scorned by what they must have viewed as the betrayal of those once close to them, these free-willed undead rallied together under the leadership of Sylvanas Windrunner, former Ranger General of Kael Thalas, who had also won her freedom from the Lich King. Taking up the banner of the Forsaken, Sylvanas and her followers claimed the kingdom and capital city of Lordaeron for themselves, establishing their new undercity in the ruins and sewers of the once bustling metropolis. Two powerful motivations now drove the Forsaken: an unquenchable thirst for vengeance against the Scourge, and the need to survive in a world where many saw their very existence as an abomination. As a means to establish a more stable footing for her budding nation, as well as to further her own personal agenda, Sylvanas sent emissaries to various factions throughout Azeroth in the hopes of building alliances. Whatever glimmer of remaining hope of reconnecting with the surviving human kingdoms was soon dashed, as many humans had already dedicated themselves to destroying all undead, whether they be Forsaken or Scourge. Perhaps not unexpectedly, the emissaries Sylvanas sent to the Alliance never returned, and the Banshee Queen suspected that they did not even survive long enough to make it to the gates of Stormwind City. She had only slightly better luck with the independent nation of Blood Elves that remained in Kael Thalas. Though her people were not killed when she reached out, the Blood Elves refused to give the Forsaken sanctuary, for they had grown fearful of all undead after the culling of Kael Thalas during the Scourge invasion. Surprisingly, the most promising of their new potential allies came from the Tauren of Thunderbluff, where Archdruid Hamul Runetotem saw great potential for the Forsaken. The Archdruid was fully aware of the Forsaken's sinister origins and desire for revenge, but still believed that they could be redeemed, and so brought their cause to the attention of Chieftain Cairn Bloodhoof, who also felt that this new nation of Forsaken should be given a chance to thrive. Cairn in turn brought the matter to Thrall, war chief of the Horde, who invited Sylvanas to the Horde capital of Orgrimmar. Thrall, like many orcs, was sympathetic to the plight of the free-willed undead, as the orcs too were once forced to serve masters who ordered them to do unspeakable things. To help further these negotiations, all undead delegations sent to Kalimdor insisted that their primary goal was to find a cure for their undeath, and that they hoped the shamanistic magics mastered by many within the Horde may aid in this cause. During these talks, the Forsaken also found a surprising champion in Magatha Grimtotem, who claimed to want to help cure the Forsaken. Many within the Horde believed her own motivations to be more malicious, however. The Darkspear Trolls, for their part, were not fond of the idea of an alliance with the Forsaken, believing their undead nature to be against their shamanistic beliefs. Thrall and Cairn were sympathetic to their plight, but were also suspicious of the Forsaken's true intentions. Still, they recognized that bringing the undead into the Horde would give the faction an invaluable foothold in the Eastern Kingdoms, something the faction was sorely lacking. The pair and the Darkspear chieftain Vol'jin also understood that the battle against the Scourge in Northrend was not yet complete, and the Horde would need every ally they could get when the time came to go to war in Northrend. They decided to acquiesce to the wisdom of the Earthen Ring, a council of neutral shaman, for their final decision. These sages pointed out that while the Forsaken were indeed battling their own inner demons, the Orcs had been doing the same for generations. Ultimately, an alliance of convenience was formed between the Forsaken and the rest of the Horde, a dubious union reflected in the mechanics of World of Warcraft. Since the vanilla release of the title, Forsaken players started off at a neutral disposition with the other Horde factions, while Horde players of any other race begin as neutral with the Forsaken but friendly with all others. Of course, the out-of-world, out-of-lore explanation of the Forsaken joining the Horde is, in reality, a much simpler one free of political machinations and maneuvering. The Forsaken joined the Horde because they were cool and the developers wanted them to be playable. It's not hard to imagine that during the development of Warcraft 3 and the Frozen Throne, the writers and developers at Blizzard Entertainment just thought it would be fun or cool to play as the undead in their upcoming MMO. It was an easy and interesting way to incorporate important lore-heavy locations like Lordaeron in a way that many players could quickly access, and an even easier explanation to include key characters who had died in Warcraft 3 as major story points moving forward, such as the faction leader Sylvanas Windrunner. It also allowed the writers of World of Warcraft to explore rich narrative themes like loss, self-hatred, redemption, and recovery from a unique perspective within the game's world. Given that the balance of player versus player interactions within World of Warcraft meant that there could only be two playable factions, these undead couldn't be their own faction similar to the Scourge campaigns of Warcraft 3. At the time, it would have been difficult to believe that the Lich King and his Scourge would be willing to diplomatically join either faction, or that either the Alliance or the Horde would even welcome them into their ranks. This meant that it was necessary for any playable undead to act independently of the Lich King's control, and thus, the Forsaken were the obvious choice. As for why they were assigned to the Horde over the Alliance when all playable undead were once human, from a design perspective, again this was probably driven by the idea of balance. In the vanilla release of World of Warcraft, 3 of the main Horde races were based on Kalimdor, while 3 of the main Alliance races were based in the Eastern Kingdoms. It makes sense to give both factions some sort of foothold on the other continent outside of neutral cities and higher-level areas like Booty Bay, or sparsely populated yet lore-important towns like Theramore. The Night Elves filled this role quite nicely for the Alliance, while the Forsaken worked well enough for the Horde. Any in-universe explanation for their tenuous partnership with the Horde was likely made up to justify something the developers thought was cool enough to be playable. In the end, the Forsaken gave the creatives at Blizzard fertile soil to sow future storylines and character development, all while being just a really fun addition to their world and lore, and that, in and of itself, is more than enough reason. I love the Warcraft universe and would love to talk about it more. What other questions about Warcraft would you like answered? And what other stories and other franchises would you want explained? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, please remember to like and subscribe for more lore and explanations headed your way. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time I upload. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.